Very few people want to, I think, necessarily pick up a political book, but one that makes a political point, I think, through the story of a family and food it has the power to reach more people, and that's what I hope to do with this book.
Hi everyone, you're listening to the Southasia Review of Books podcast from Himal, Southasian, where we speak to celebrated authors and emerging literary voices from across South Asia. I'm your host, Shwetha Srikanthan, coming to you from Colombo, and my guest today is the award-winning food writer, Shahnaz Ahsan, joining us from Rwanda to talk about her new book, The Jackfruit Chronicles, Memories and Recipes from a British-Bangladeshi Kitchen. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to invite our listeners to check out Himal's Patreon program on our website. For just $5 a month, you can help support our mission to give South Asian literature the spotlight it deserves. To make conversations like this possible, we need the support of our listeners like you. Part memoir, part cookbook, The Jackfruit Chronicles is a deeply personal exploration of food, family, and identity. Through stories and recipes, Shahnaz guides us through the vibrant flavors and captivating stories of Bengali food and its place in Britain. The book traces not only one family's journey, but also the wider story of the Bangladeshi diaspora's search for home and belonging. Shahnaz, welcome to the Southasia Review of Books podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
You begin the Jackfruit Chronicles with a moving story of how your parents discovered a food cellar in the suburbs of Zimbabwe, where you lived, who sold jackfruit, the national fruit of Bangladesh. It's a fruit that the diaspora Bangladeshis often go to great lengths to find. This sets the stage for your reflections on how South Asian families express love, not always in words or actions, but through food. You write that food is the thread that binds us to our histories and our futures. It's a testament to where we come from. And you dedicate the book to your family for teaching you so much, especially lessons in love and jackfruit. Could you share more about tracing this thread of food, family, history, and migration in the Jackfruit Chronicles and what this journey ultimately revealed to you?
Yeah, so like many British Bangladeshis, I was always very aware of the migration within my family. So my grandparents arrived in Britain in the late 1950s. So my grandfather arrived in 1956 and my grandmother followed about 10 years later. And my mum was born in the UK. I was born in the UK. And so for 3 generations, we've been in the UK. As you mentioned at the beginning, I now live in Rwanda. Work and marriage and so on has taken me back out of the UK. But I grew up being very conscious that we came from somewhere else. And the way that that was most tangible in our home, obviously we spoke the language, we spoke Bangla at home, but we also spoke English. And in terms of the dress, we wore Western clothes, we wore South Asian clothes, we wore saris on special occasions. But the thing that was there every day was food. And the thing that made us different to everybody else in the best possible way was food. So when I went to school, my packed lunches, sometimes they had cheese in, sometimes they had tuna, but quite often it would be leftover curried vegetables or leftover tandoori chicken that my mum would put in a sandwich. And so for me, food is the way that I choose to tell the story of migration, especially living in the West. Growing up in the West and the conversations that are still happening in the West now about immigration, especially from the former colonial countries of the UK, it's a very toxic debate. It's not even a debate really. It seems to be just a one-sided argument, sort of talking about migrants and their families as being a drain on British society. And that's me and my family that they're talking about. And so the Jackfruit Chronicles is an intensely political book, but I've chosen to tell it through the lens of food because I feel like that is one of the more accessible ways of connecting with an audience. Very few people want to, I think, necessarily pick up a political book, but one that makes a political point, I think, through the story of a family and food it has the power to reach more people, and that's what I hope to do with this book.
Shahnaz, getting a little bit more into that, you chose to chronicle your history not for others, but for your own children, to celebrate, recognize, and validate your family and those who came before you. Your fantastic debut novel, Hashim and Family, is another exploration of family ties, migration, and connection to home. And like you said, there were so many lenses through which you could have told your story, but this time you chose food, which carries this deep meaning in terms of culture and memory. It offers such a tangible connection to the past and allows you to explore these wider threads of colonialism, migration, and empire. Could you tell us a little bit more about why food became the most natural lens and what exactly it allowed you to capture about your heritage and family experience that fiction or a more traditional memoir could not?
Yeah, so fiction, as you mentioned, my first book, Hashim and Family, is very much a fictionalized account of aspects of my family's history. So it covers the story of a family who moved from what was then known as East Pakistan to Britain in the 1950s, so mirroring my grandparents' migration story. And then it also looks at the independence war through which East Pakistan became Bangladesh. And so it looks at this idea of a country gaining its independence at the same time. And so that was also inspired by family history. So I've done exploring these things through fiction, and I found that really valuable and validating. And it seems to really land with the audience that the book reached, which really meant a lot. But food for me it's the thing that you do every day. Every day you have to wake up and you have to choose what you have for breakfast or lunch or dinner. And, we're very fortunate to be in that position that we even have a choice. But it's symbolic of so much. And so when I was thinking about the things that I feel make me me and make my family who we are, it is this love of food. Bangladeshis are known for being very into our food. It's a great source of sharing and communication. It's a way through which we express our regional differences as well. There's huge amounts of regional variation when it comes to Bengali and Bangladeshi cooking. And so it was kind of a natural thing for me when I sat down to think about how do I write about my family? How do I write about our journeys? Food was just the obvious thing. And I think maybe in some families it's a different thing. Maybe for some families it's music or dance or theatre or, they've got their own channels through which they express themselves and they connect with each other. And for us, it happens to be cooking and eating and sharing and even the shopping around cooking as well. So I talk a lot about that in the book. So yeah, I call it our love language. And I don't mean that to sound trite. It genuinely is our love language. It is the way that we express care and consideration. And so it just felt natural, to be honest.
You don't position the Jackfruit Chronicles as a definitive guide to Bengali cuisine. Instead, it's a collection of recipes from your British-Bangladeshi family, blending traditional Sylheti home-style cooking with innovations shaped by life in the diaspora. With your family's food habits evolving over several decades and across countries, like so many other immigrant families, a unique cuisine was developed by fusing elements from multiple food traditions. You also write that these evolving food habits reflect an increasing confidence in identity. Could you tell us more about how this fusion shaped your own cooking and what writing this book revealed about your family's evolving identity and food traditions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like we're in a space at the moment where authenticity, whatever that means, is very highly prized. And I think sometimes it's almost like this white whale. I'm not really sure that it exists, this idea of authenticity, but everybody's obsessed with it. And I think it's because people equate, in quotes, authenticity with legitimacy. And the way that I feel about it actually is that if you put aside this pursuit of authenticity, it actually enables you to be more true to yourself, because you're leaving space open for change. You're leaving space open for adapting, letting in new ideas. And when it comes to food, letting in new ingredients or new techniques and ways of cooking. So with my family, I think it just happened very naturally. You're living in a different country. So, my grandparents, they had their children. Their children were raised in an environment where the common foods were different and the celebrations were different. And so in Bangladesh, of course, my family never celebrated Christmas, but we came to the UK and Christmas is all around us. It's in the shops, it's in schools, it's in the adverts on TV. So of course we want to participate in that. And I think what's really important is that, for my family and many like us, that's okay. Celebrating, participating in something doesn't mean you're not holding on to the things of your own culture that are important. It doesn't mean that you're validating another culture more than your own. It means that you're leaving space to be able to interact and to be able to take it and make it yours. And I think that is really important for this idea of feeling legitimate as people who will always look different. It doesn't matter how many generations my family will be in the UK. We will always look different to the majority, the white majority. And so we will always be questioned. And I think this is quite a painful realization that I've had growing up. My position in the UK, my right to be there, will always be questioned. And the same with my children for as long as we've, got brown skin. And so we can't be asking anybody else for permission. So if we want to cook, an English traditional roast dinner, but we want to add tandoori masala to it, then that's our right to do that. If we want to celebrate Christmas with our family or with our friends, but we don't particularly like the way that turkey is roasted, we want to do it our way, then that's also okay. And I think it's very much about, as you say, the confidence. I think when you can claim something as yours, you haven't got these hang-ups about not being enough. You haven't got these hang-ups about doing it the proper way. You can take some of it and do it the proper way, but you can also add your own twist on it, your own flavour on it. And I think that's where the most beautiful things come about. And I do wonder if in the past, I don't know if we were always as obsessed as, keeping things pure, keeping things legitimate, or being so fearful about it. There's also these conversations at the moment as well about cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. And I really feel like, for the most part, we overthink this, if I'm really honest. I think for the most part, we really are trying. When I say we, I mean people who are interested in other food cultures and so on. I think it's important to be mindful about it. I think it's really important to approach it with, as the word says, appreciation and also a recognition of the origins of it. But I don't think that means that we shouldn't be encouraged to try and do things our way. And a really good example of that actually is the jackfruit itself. So jackfruit has become so trendy in Western food culture as being this vegan alternative to meat. And even the way that it's often described, it's often described as a vegan alternative to pulled pork, which just sort of intrinsically for me I find it very jarring, because I'm Muslim, we don't eat pork, and this idea that one of my favorite foods is akin to that feels reductive in some way, because it's so much more than just this. And for a long time, I was really negative about it, to be honest. It's very much like, oh, great, the West has discovered jackfruit. Now we all need to accept that it's cool. But actually, I think if it's recognized as having its independent origins and its independent place in other societies and other cultures, then fine, have it as pulled pork. That's okay. And I think that's often the bit that's missing. I think that recognition that this does have a very long, revered history, significance in other cultures, as you say, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, in Thailand, in lots of places. This fruit is really significant. And I think the message is getting out there now.
You show how in Bengali culture, there are multiple words for home, each carrying its own meaning. Bari refers to one's ancestral home in the village, a place that welcomes family members back, no matter how far or for how long they've traveled. Basha, on the other hand, describes the house or apartment where someone lives more regularly, often in towns or cities, and is usually built by the family using remittances from abroad. You write that while a bari is an accident of birth, Basha reflects a family's hard work, sacrifice, and achievements. Your grandparents, Habib and Fatima, built their own Basha after becoming pioneers in the British-Bangladeshi community. Tell us a little bit about their life journey and their experiences over the decades.
My grandfather, Habib Ullah, he was an inspiration for my first book as well, for Hashim and Family. His experiences as a new migrant in the UK really informed a lot of the characters in my first book. And so for the Jackfruit Chronicles, I really wanted my grandparents to not just be characters, or I wanted them to be themselves, and I wanted to portray them. My children, unfortunately, never had the chance to meet my grandfather. My grandmother divides her time between the UK and Bangladesh. So my children know her, but they only know her as their great-grandmother. And so I really wanted to bring her story to light as well. So they both arrived in the UK in the late 50s, early 60s. My grandfather ran two restaurants, owned and ran two restaurants in Manchester. My grandmother helped him with that. They were part of this very early restaurant trade where lots of Bangladeshis started restaurants in the UK, and that became their livelihood. And so they did that in the 70s. They had 6 children, raised them all in the UK, and went on to have 14 grandchildren. And my grandfather, because of the background that he came from, he was very, very smart at school, but he never got a chance to finish school because sadly his father died very young and the family were poor, so he had to leave school to go and work to support his family. And so even though he was very sharp, he never had that formal education. And so it was a matter of great, I think, sorrow for him, to be honest, that he never learnt to read or write in any language. And yet he was so engaged. He was engaged politically. He was really interested in politics in the UK as well. He was very much of the left wing, a supporter of, socialist ideology and so on. But he found it really important that his children would be educated and that his grandchildren would be educated. And both he and my grandmother really prioritized that for all of their family. They had tragedies as well in the family. So very sadly, my uncle, their middle son, was killed in a racist attack while he was at school, and he was only 13 at the time. And I wrote about that in the book because I think you can't really tell the story of my family without acknowledging that, because it, as well as the tragic, heartbreaking personal loss that was for my grandparents to lose their child, my aunts and uncles, and my mum to lose their sibling, it also changed the whole trajectory of the family. Everybody became much more sort of alive to the reality of racial discrimination in the UK and just how dangerous it was, and committed their lives really to campaign for racial equality and justice. And my grandmother founded a school in her son's name, which is in Bangladesh now. It is one of the top performing schools in their region, in their district. It's called the Ahmed Iqbal Ullah Memorial High School. And that's just a really beautiful legacy, I think, of what my grandparents really wanted. So yes, I could tell their story again in many different ways, but I think their biggest legacy is turning really heartbreaking, tragic things that you wouldn't wish on anyone, and turning that into a force of good. And that's really how I think of them.
And the book is such a beautiful tribute to them as well. For your grandparents, food in a new country was a real challenge. They had to learn to cook and adapt to unfamiliar ingredients and tools. Shops rarely stock the essentials for Bangladeshi cooking, and sourcing spices and produce beyond the limited English selections was almost impossible. Your grandfather, like many migrants, learned that necessity is indeed the mother of invention. You write that their creativity in sourcing and substituting ingredients gave rise to a unique make-do style of cooking, some of which are staples in the British-Bangladeshi diaspora to this day. Could you tell us about their relationship to food and how this in turn shaped your own connection to cooking and culinary heritage?
Yeah, so I think it's a really universal thing that home, the taste of home, right? Like whenever we travel away from home, you crave the things that you miss and that you can't get where you are. So I think they had that in a huge way, at least now with globalization and so on. It's far more easy to get hold of things. You know, there's a Chinese supermarket in pretty much every corner of the world. There's an Asian supermarket everywhere. You can access these things. I think it's really important to just be aware that for the immigrants to the UK in the 60s, there was none of that. And so they were really, you know, it felt like they were a million miles away from home, not just in terms of distance, but also in terms of familiarity, what they could eat, you know, one of these most basic things. And so I think maybe that's part of the reason why food is so significant for diaspora communities wherever they are. And I think whenever they get together, whenever there's like a gathering, food is such a central part of it. And I think this idea of sharing food as well. So going back to the significance of jackfruit, you know, it's such a huge fruit. You can't have it without sharing with other people. And so the part of its attraction, as much as the food itself, is what it symbolizes. You know, people coming together, people spending time together, taking time out of work, sharing, feeling like they're back home. And I think, yes, these very particular dishes that I talk about in the book, they've lived on in the British-Bangladeshi diaspora kitchens because I think they're nostalgic in lots of ways. And also they taste delicious. So one of the recipes I talk about is borta, we call it. It's like a mashed dish, and you can make it out of anything, but one of the favorites is to make it out of tinned fish. Because in the UK, when they arrived, you know, fish was either battered in a fish and chip shop or you found it in a tin. Very few people had fresh fish. And obviously, Bengalis love their fish. So they made this borta with tinned fish. So it was either tinned sardines or tinned tuna or mackerel with onions and chilies and coriander and lime. And it's delicious. And we still have that now. And I always think about that as being very symbolic of, as I write in the book, this kind of make-do idea of cooking, that you use what you've got and you bring the knowledge that you have or the taste preferences that you have and you marry them together and you create something that really stands the test of time. The fact that I'm still making it in my kitchen now, living in Rwanda, you know, a good 60 years after my grandparents left their home country says a lot.
You also weave in so many important histories of the British-Bangladeshi community. And you write about how a Bangla concept that doesn't have a direct equivalent in English is probashi. It describes being away from one's home in a foreign land. But unlike the label immigrant, it's a self-claimed identity. While the closest English term you write might be expat, it often suggests privilege, whereas probashi carries a sense of mourning, loss, or a longing to return home. And interestingly, you note that probashi played a vital role in the birth of Bangladesh. Through their efforts centered around food and restaurants, they helped shape the nation's independence. Could you tell us more about this crucial role probashi played, particularly through food?
Yeah, so the research that I cite in the book was actually conducted by my sister, soon to be Dr. Shahnaz Ahsan, and Dr. Taslim Shakur, who is a very known and respected British-Bangladeshi academic. And they collaborated on a project which was called Stories of 71. And I'm sure your listeners can look that up and find more resources on it. But it's a recording of oral testimonies. So it's Bangladeshis who lived in the north of England in 1971 and their efforts to support the war effort that was happening in East Pakistan as it became Bangladesh. And so they would gather together. So these were from across all walks of life. These were academics, these were factory workers, they were students, restaurant owners. They would gather together regularly to discuss how they could support the war effort. So they would lobby politicians, they would lobby people to speak in the Houses of Parliament to sort of bring attention to the plight of Bangladeshis. They tried to get local media interested, and arguably it wouldn't have garnered such international attention had these people not gone to so much effort, because it worked. I mean, it was discussed in the Houses of Parliament in the UK. Newspapers did start covering it. It became part of British foreign policy to be involved in this and to back the independence movement. So yeah, I write in the book that arguably this wouldn't have happened without the support of these Prabashi. And I think that's a really poetic perspective almost, like it's almost like giving birth, I suppose. You need help, you have a midwife, you have people on the outside who are helping you, supporting you. And that's the role that I envision, the image that comes to mind for me when I think about the Prabashi abroad. They couldn't be on the ground. They weren't fighting. The best that they could do was to gather together, send money, lobby, do what they could, raise awareness. And so they also needed to meet. They didn't have community centres because previously they would have shared the Pakistani community centres in the UK. And when this, separation was declared, they suddenly didn't have these communal spaces to congregate in. And that's where the restaurants really came in. And so people would come to these restaurants, they would be fed. And in these oral testimonies that were collected by Dr. Shakur and Dr. Ahsan, it's really beautiful. Like, you read about it, these restaurant owners almost despairing because they're saying, we've got to lose more money, but we can't have all of these people come not feed them. Like, that's unacceptable. So I think it also shows this idea of hospitality. People were prepared to go out of pocket to show solidarity and to gather people together. And I think that's really lovely.
Of the many, many beautiful moments you share in the book, you describe learning to cook alongside your aunt Runa, or Mami, as you came to call her, becoming her sous chef, and even tackling tasks your mother wasn't quite ready to entrust to you. Her faith in you helped build your confidence in the kitchen. And this is a gift that was passed on from one generation to the next. Mommy was barely able to fry an egg, and then taught by her in-laws, she became the unparalleled best cook in your whole family. Then there's Major Chachi, your father's brother's wife, who was the main cook back in Bangladesh and who patiently guided your early fascination with cooking. Could you tell us about how Runa, Major Chachi, your mother and your grandmother, their food specialisms, and how these remarkable women shaped your love of cooking?
Yeah, so they all had their own specialism. So Major Chachi, she was the only cook that I watched in Bangladesh. So I only went to Bangladesh a few times in my childhood. Most of the time I was in the UK. And so watching her cook was like watching a TV show almost. It was so different to what I knew. She cooked in earthenware clay pots. The stove that she had was built out of clay on the ground. She burnt wood to cook. So it was just a completely different context, a completely different setup. It was fascinating. And I think as a result of it being so different, but yet also so familiar at the same time, I just found it really intriguing. So the food that she would cook was the same as what my mum cooked. She would do like fried aubergine, begun we call it, and dal and rice. But it just tasted different, and it took me a really long time to work out what that missing ingredient was. And it was firewood. It was the smell, the scent of cooking on the utensils that she had, the clay pots and the fuel that she was using, all of that, that's what made it taste different. So yeah, I always think of her when I think of, I guess, more traditional type of cooking. And Mami, my Auntie Runa, she is the one who I think is the most experimental cook in our family. So she's really excellent at traditional Bangladeshi food, of course, but also she loves to read magazines and cookbooks and watch TV. And so she's the one who will try, as we talked about in the beginning, these fusion recipes. And I include a couple of her recipes in the book as well. One of these dishes was called paprika chicken that she got from a magazine, but then made it her own. So it's chicken and rice baked in the oven with paprika and peppers and chili and all kinds of delicious things. And I always think of her, that is the recipe that comes to mind when I think of her, because even though she can cook so much traditional stuff and so many, like Western dishes, that to me is the best example of fusing the two together. And I think for me, I feel so enriched having witnessed, such a range of cooking within my family. And I think one of the things that I've taken for granted actually is coming from a family of really good cooks. When I meet people, sometimes I come across them and they say, oh yeah, my mum hated cooking, or she never really enjoyed it. I find it so hard to understand where that's coming from. So yeah, I definitely feel very blessed to have had that.
And you touched on this a little bit, but in the book you capture the bittersweet experience of a first visit back home. You write about how your father's childhood stories painted a vivid picture, but these visits offered you more ways to understand him and your family history better. And so your first trip to Bangladesh in December 1991, at age 4, left such a lasting memory. Like you said, the scent of cooking on clay stoves, wood-fired and earthy, a smell as much part of the dishes as the food itself. And it's something that's so impossible to recreate today with modern kitchens. Could you tell us about the significance of these childhood visits to Bangladesh and how they shaped your sense of home, family, and food?
They carried so much significance. On a very sort of basic level, it was the chance that we got to see that side of the family. So all of my mum's family was in the UK, but all of my dad's family was still in Bangladesh. And so it was a way to put faces to names. Because again, these were years before the internet, believe it or not. The days before phones, as in mobile phones, being able to send pictures easily. So our connections were really just based on landline calls that my dad would make every couple of weeks. And obviously landline calls were very expensive. The line wasn't very good. So often you would just be like shouting down the phone and the other person may or may not hear you. And there was an echo. And it felt, the distance you could feel it was very palpable. Now it's completely different. So I'm in touch with my cousins in Bangladesh all the time. We've got a shared WhatsApp group. We swap photos of our children. We swap photos of where we're living. It's very different. And I suppose we wouldn't have that relationship now had my parents not persevered back then. And so, yeah, going back on these family visits, I guess were foundational because it laid the groundwork for us to be able to continue these relationships now. And yeah, maybe this is like a slight digression, but when people criticize social media so much these days, I'm a huge defender of it. Obviously not completely, it has its flaws and so on. But for me, being able to stay in touch with family members and not just stay in touch with, but in some ways build up those relationships from the start. I know more about my cousins and their lives now than I ever did back then. And that's thanks to social media. So yeah. And then I think another significance to these visits back home is the contrast, I think. So if we were to only spend our time in the UK, I think we'd spend a lot of our time sort of being very conscious that yes, Britain is our home. This is where we were raised. We went to school here. We speak the language. Our friends are here. We feel British in many ways. And yet, as I said before, always having this sort of challenge to our identity. And then I think it's easy to romanticize what it means to be back in Bangladesh. And, you know, this idea that we're told that this is our motherland or our fatherland, you know, where our parents came from. And then when you actually go there and you realize that you don't completely fit in there either, in some ways it can be very displacing and very jarring. But I think over time I've come to see that as also a gift because I don't romanticize it anymore. Like I know that being in Bangladesh comes with a unique set of circumstances. And in some ways I feel very at home. In some ways I feel very alien. But it means that I can own, I think, a little bit with a little bit more confidence that home is where I choose for it to be. There will always be aspects that feel more or less at home wherever I am in the world, and that's okay, and that will change. And I think it means that you place less emphasis on this, I think this rose-tinted idea of what home should be, and I think it's more realistic and therefore more achievable, I think. So yeah.
And getting into that a little bit more, in retrospect, you describe this heaviness around childhood trips to Bangladesh. To you, these visits had to contain every possible experience, and sometimes it felt like a test of being truly Bangladeshi. And for a while, you hoped that visiting would help you reconcile different parts of your identity. But moments like asking a cousin about the 1971 Liberation War in 2016 while you were writing your novel and being met with, "Why do you want to know?" revealed a sense of guilt and inadequacy that's often felt by diaspora children. Your Bangla isn't fluent enough, your accent is different, and you feel never quite Bangladeshi enough. And as an adult, you came to embrace being a diaspora British Bangladeshi as a legitimate identity, recognizing that your connection to heritage doesn't need to be measured or justified. You also found that whatever you choose to embrace from your country of birth doesn't define or dilute your claim to Bangladesh. Could you share what you've come to understand about this idea of home and how you came to embrace and reconcile these different parts of your identity?
Yeah, so I think it's been a lifelong work in progress, to be honest. I think children of the diaspora, not just Bangladeshi, but, you know, anyone who's in that position, feels this sense of like a tug of war almost of guilt. And I don't think that necessarily comes from the parents, either intentionally or deliberately. But I think it's just this idea of wanting to appease and to feel like you're honoring your, you know, all sides of your identity equally. And I think for me, I can't say that I got there completely by myself. I actually think it's being connected with other diaspora kids. Young adults now, most of them parents in their own way as well. But, you know, again, on social media, on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, you're seeing such a beautiful, I think, reclamation of kids who have been born in the diaspora, but really want to connect with their Bengali or Sri Lankan or Pakistani heritages, whether that's through cooking or, you know, perfecting a handicraft or music or all of these things. And I just think there's something really empowering about saying, yeah, you know, like I am from New Jersey or, you know, I am from London and yeah, I can still claim this and that's okay. So to answer the question of how I got there is actually quite difficult because, as I say, I think it's just been bit by bit. And I think it's never being prepared to let go. You know, when somebody turns around and says, "Oh, but why do you care? Why do you know?" I didn't then want to turn around and be like, "Oh, actually, yeah, you're right. Why do I care? I'm not going to care." If anything, it made me dig my heels in more and sort of say, well, of course I have a right to know. Like, and you can't tell me that I don't have a right to know. So yeah, I think like the more that you see people having conversations specifically about what it means to be diaspora means that it's its own unique specific thing. And that in itself, I think, is it's always more validating when something has a name, you know? So to recognize that this is its own distinct identity in itself is just a relief. You know, you're just like, okay, so this is the category that I'm in, and then I can work with that. And then I think another dimension to answer your question also is, as an adult, I've moved around a lot. I've had the privilege of moving around for work, for study. I've lived in the US. I've lived in different countries across Africa as part of my husband's work, and moved our children around. So I'm kind of practiced, I think, in this idea of not being in a familiar environment. And so the idea of what connotes home for me has become smaller and smaller in some ways. You know, it's my house, it's my family, it's my bedroom, it's my garden. Like, it's become very small. And I don't mean small in a negative way. I just mean small in terms of like an immediate, proximate way. And I think it's a feeling that you have. So when I go back to the UK and I visit my parents, that feels like home. When I go to my in-laws' house, that also feels like a different home. When I go to my grandmother's house, when I come, you know, back to where I'm living right now, I've just moved house actually. So my family and we've just moved to Rwanda in East Africa. And we've only been here for 3 weeks. It doesn't feel like home yet, but because I've moved around so much, I think I know what I need to do to make it feel like home. And a big part of that is giving it time, and really investing in the things that will make it feel familiar. So whether that's your environment, friendships, neighbors. Yeah. I would say I'm almost an expert in trying to make places feel like home.
And food is such a big part of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, figuring out where to buy, where to shop for food. So in my first week here, actually, I was trying to get hold of halal chicken because I wanted to cook chicken curry for my kids. It's their favorite thing. And I didn't know where to begin. And it was a really lovely journey, actually. I was in a fruit and veg shop and I noticed on the wall there was some Islamic calligraphy that was hanging. And so I said, oh, you know, do you know where I would be able to get halal meat? And it was funny because this decoration was the symbol that I needed to know that I could ask these guys the question. Otherwise I wouldn't have known, like, if that wasn't hanging there. And then he recommended me to a butcher. So I got in a taxi. We don't have our own cars at the moment, so we can't drive. So I got this taxi and asked him to take me to this market. And it's in the middle of one of the busiest, craziest markets in Kigali. And so we went, and he stopped the car to try and find it on the map. And the car, just by chance, stopped right outside this butcher. And I saw the name on the front. So I got out and I said to him, you know, your friend at the fruit and veg shop sent me, and he said that I can get some chicken from here. And it was just such a lovely moment because the guy who sent me was a refugee from Afghanistan. He was me, British-Bangladeshi, had been living in Zimbabwe, and now has just moved to Rwanda in my first week. The guy who owned the shop was Rwandan. His chicken supplier was there. He was a Syrian refugee. And then one of the other customers who was there was from Sudan, who I think had also sadly been fleeing war. And so here I was with all of these people who'd come from all over the world. And yet, what was it that we were all looking for? We were looking for halal chicken because we wanted to honor our religious requirements and so on. But we were also looking for food because we wanted to cook the things that were familiar to us. And it was just one of those moments where I thought, yeah, you know, we all share this fundamental need, don't we, wherever we are in the world.
And Shahnaz, coming full circle to something you touched on in the beginning, just a few days ago, there was the massive right-wing anti-immigration demonstration under the banner Unite the Kingdom across London, which highlighted how immigrants and communities of color continue to be the targets of hate and violence in Britain. At the same time, South Asian migrants and all migrants in general, the food they brought with them have been central to British culture and life. Could you share your thoughts on how work like yours can serve as a source of resistance and reflection of the contributions and challenges faced by the British-Bangladeshi community and immigrant communities more broadly across the country.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you framed it as sort of a work of resistance, because I think telling our stories on our terms will always be an act of resistance. And yeah, I didn't write this book hoping to change anyone's mind. That was not my intention. As you mentioned, I wrote it for my family, for my kids, and for other people, not necessarily from a Bangladeshi diaspora, but any diaspora. You know, this idea that our stories matter and they're of interest. When we talk about immigrants, there's always this sort of narrative of a good immigrant. You know, there's even the essay collection about the good immigrant, and from a UK context, people often talk about immigrants contributing to the NHS, contributing to public services, contributing to food. And I think that's like one dimension that we can look at it. But I would actually like to take contribution out of the conversation and actually just bring it down fundamentally to humanity and to a universalism, like a universal right to safety, a universal right to economic prosperity, universal right to good healthcare. And then also link that idea of universalism to historical context. Immigrants wouldn't be in the UK to the degree that they're there without centuries worth of colonial plunder and exploitation and so on. And so you need to have that reckoning as well. Do I think that books like mine alone will change the conversation? No, sadly. I hope that they add to it, and I hope that more and more will be added to it. But I think actually this is one of the things where political change really needs to happen. I do think it needs to be from the top down as well. Like, I don't think that this demonstration that happened a few days ago, you know, people are saying, oh, well, it just shows how much, you know, the sentiment and so on has changed in the UK. I don't think that's the full conversation. I actually think it's about how political parties and politicians have exploited what they see as these fractures in society and exacerbated it. So rather than putting more money into public services, they're saying, we don't have any money because the immigrants are coming and they're taking your jobs and they're taking everything and so on. So yeah, I think that the responsibility still fundamentally is with the political and the media elite. I think it's becoming a very toxic environment in the UK, across, like much of the world. And I hope that stories like this and books like this will continue to push the needle. But I think that we also need more concrete sort of political change.
You were fortunate enough to discover that your passions, what drives you, is food and storytelling. You write about how you started teaching Bengali cookery classes, an opportunity to share your passion for cooking and teaching. Under the banner of Tiger Kitchen, you ventured into the startup world, hosting classes, then supper clubs across London. Your first event, A Taste of Bengal, was a celebration of food's power to bring people together. Could you tell us about what this means to you and what new direction or projects you're most excited to explore next?
Yeah, that's a lovely question. Yeah, the Supper Club adventure for me, the Supper Club chapter was so beautiful. I started it in 2016 and ran it for 2 years until I left London, left the UK and moved to Africa. And then I've done supper clubs in the different African countries that I've lived in as well. So held supper clubs in Ethiopia, in Zimbabwe. I hope to also host one here in Rwanda once I found my feet and, you know, figured out where to get good basmati rice from and so on. And I think that's kind of it. This idea of being able to host people and being able to introduce people to a cuisine, a culinary heritage that means so much to me wherever I am in the world is something that I always want to be able to do. And for me, like I was talking about sort of feeling at home, it's one of the ways through which I can feel at home. And it's one of the ways that makes me feel most cemented in a place. Once I've had my first dinner party, that's when I kind of feel like, okay, I've arrived, I'm here, I managed to pull that off. The food was good, everyone had a good time. And that sort of sense of like exhaustion almost at the end of it is such a buzz for me, actually. So yeah, on a small sort of scale, achievable thing, I'm very much looking forward to hosting my first dinner party here, and then hopefully turning that into maybe a supper club, whether that's a one-off or a recurring thing, is something that I'm very keen on exploring. On the writing side, I am maintaining my Substack, which is called Scribbles and Dribbles, and it's about writing while raising 2 small kids. So I'm maintaining that at the moment, and then also I'm hoping to continue working on my next book. I've got a couple of different ideas at the moment that I'm sort of teasing out. So at the moment I'm working on 2 concurrent projects. One is another book about food and literature, and the other one is a return to fiction, actually. It's sort of an exploration of Bangladeshi folk tales with Gothic undertones. It's kind of as much as I can say at the moment. But yeah, it's, in some ways I think readers will see some similarities to the kind of work that I've done before, but I guess a very different tone overall, more sort of Gothic and supernatural.
Shahnaz, I'm so excited for your next books. And thank you so much for this wonderful conversation and for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it so much. And I think the work of what you're doing at Southasia Review of Books is amazing. And I wish you luck in everything that you do.
Thank you for listening to the Southasia Review of Books podcast from Himal, Southasian. If you like this episode, please share widely, rate, review, subscribe, and download the show on your favorite podcast apps. You can find the links to subscribe and listen to previous episodes on our website at himalmag.com. And while you're at it, please do also check out Himal's State of South Asia podcast, hosted by Associate Editor Nayanthara Narayanan, featuring conversations on pressing social and political issues from across South Asia. What we do and what we love doing at Himal is really looking at South Asian writing and ideas like no other. And that gives us a very unique community, viewpoint, and the privilege of making conversations like this possible. So if you'd like to support our work, please do become a paying Himal patron for just $5 a month. We have a great program with lots of perks, and we'll welcome you to a fantastic Southasia Review of Books community. Thanks again, and until next time.